Hello and welcome to TVR World Special Report. Today, fresh from re-elections, Australian Prime Minister Anthony Albanese is making Indonesia his first overseas stop amid analyst Canberra's intent to place Southeast Asia at the center of its foreign policy.
Yes, Prime Minister Albanese is scheduled to meet President Prabowo Subianto at the Presidential Palace in Jakarta this morning. They are expected to discuss a wide range of issues related to bilateral relations and regional stability. And today we will discuss all these issues with Professor of International Relations from Universitas Indonesia, Professor Evi Fitriani, PhD, and researcher at CSIS Indonesia, Peter Pandi, that's already with us this morning in the studio.
Thank you very much.
Thanks for having me.
And our special report is with me, Sesko Satrio.
And I'm Stephanie Silitonga, and like Sesko already said, we will deep dive into the discussions, particularly on the internal relations between Australia and Indonesia.
And this is our special report about Australian Prime Minister's state visit.
The Australian Prime Minister travels to Indonesia on his first overseas visit since the elections. Anthony Albanese will then travel to Rome for the inauguration mass of Pope Leo.
Indonesia was the first bilateral prime ministerial visit in the last term, and it's the first bilateral visit this term, and that reflects the importance Indonesia has for Australia, for Australian stability, for Australian security, for our region.
It's the first trip the Prime Minister will make since the election. He also made the same trip as his first international trip as Prime Minister back in 2022. Some will remember images of him riding a bamboo motorcycle on that trip, a familiar image looking back some years ago now. In terms of the significance of this particular visit, though, it's very much an act of trying to build on security and economic ties with Indonesia. The Australia's government has long pointed towards South Asia as an area, and particularly Indonesia, of a great opportunity, particularly around economic relationships, building those, and therefore increasing trade as well. After the Indonesia trip, there's a second leg to this international visit, and it will be to Rome, where the Prime Minister will attend the inauguration mass for the new Pope, Pope Leo XIV. Australian Prime Minister Anthony Albanese was sworn in for the second term on Tuesday, May the 13th, alongside his ministers after a landslide win at the national election he said had returned the largest centre-left Labour government since Federation in 1901.
Before we continue with our news and discussions here in the studio, we would like to head to the Presidential Palace in Jakarta to see the latest updates and situation there. Let's take a look at the Presidential Palace. In our screen, we'll see that we're seeing the entourage of Prime Minister Anthony Albanese.
Yeah, the convoy is approaching the palace, where Prime Minister of Australia, Anthony Albanese, then later will meet with President Prabowo, the President of the Republic of Indonesia. And as we know, last night, Prime Minister Albanese arrived at Halim Perdana Kusuma and already welcomed by the coordinating Minister for Economic Affairs, Erlangga Hartarto, and also Indonesian Foreign Minister Sugiono.
Yes, as we can see in the screen, they're passing through Monas, I guess, and maybe we can ask our experts here. Maybe we start with Bu Evi. Bu Evi, how do you see this, or how do you anticipate this visit from Anthony Albanese? Because we know that he didn't come to President Prabowo's election back in 2024. How do you see this?
I think this is a indication, strong indication that he plays a very important, Indonesia is a very important partner for Australia. But because we understand the circumstance at the moment, what happened with the global economy and global politics in this kind of circumstances, that we are under Trump pressures, also a lot of geopolitical problems. So I think Prime Minister Albanese tried to put more emphasis on the good relation with Indonesia under this context, not only because two countries' relation, but also regional and global circumstances encourage him to do so.
Yeah, we also know that our president, President Prabowo, always shows his good neighbor policy, we can say. How do you see this, Mas Peter, about the visit of
I
Anthony
think it's
Albanese?
as Ibu Effie says, it's also mentioned in Australia's defense white paper that was released under the Albanese administration that Indonesia is an enduring and important partner for Australia. It's consistently been within Australia's radar. You know, a stable Indonesia, a stable neighborhood results in a stable Australia. So I think this visit symbolizes that. The Albanese government's continued commitment to engage with Indonesia and the region, especially given geopolitical dynamics in the US and the greater Asia Pacific as you see it today. But it is interesting that you note that Albanese did miss Prabowo's inauguration last year because of the visit from King Charles. I think that was the first time an Australian PM ever missed Indonesian presidential inauguration since the Susilo Bambang Yudhoyono days. So it is interesting. So I think this visit will try to re-emphasize the commitment that the Australian government, specifically the Albanese government, towards engagement with Indonesia and Prabowo's administration specifically.
Right, so this visit of the Prime Minister of Australia, Anthony Albanese, it's not only a tradition where this already happened from the previous Prime Ministers of Australia, but this is also a gesture of, you know, like a friendship between Australia and Indonesia. And clearly Indonesia also becomes very special for Australia. So do you also see that? So it's not about only traditions for Australia to come to Indonesia.
Well, it's come actually from the strategic culture of Australia, because for Australia, Indonesia is very important. We are the closest neighbors of Australia, as you know. As Peter mentioned, stable Indonesia is very important for Australia. But it's not only stable Indonesia, but trustable Indonesia is very important, meaning that stable and friendly government of Indonesia is very important for Australia, because strong Indonesia will threaten Australia, but weak Indonesia is even threaten Indonesia.
Yeah.
So for Australia, Indonesia is not too strong, not too weak, is important, and a friendly and trustable government is important. That's why all Prime Minister from Australia usually try to make a very good relation with Indonesia. Back to Paul Keating in Suharto's era.
Yeah.
Yeah. Now, we'd like to know your view on this visit of the Prime Ministers of Albanese. So what will be expected from the meeting later with President Prabowo Subianto? Ibu Effie, perhaps you would like to go first.
Well, I think there will be a lot of agenda for the meeting, not only in defense, but also in security, also in economy, especially, as I mentioned, because of the international political circumstances at the moment. And Australia also have one of the countries that under Trump tariff attack, right? So it's important for Australia to also diversify its market and economic partner apart from United States. And as you know, that China is actually the biggest economic partner of Australia. But Australia could not too much depend on China. So this is why Indonesia is very important in that sense. We are a big market for Australia. But apart from the defense and economic issues, I also hope that the two governments will also discuss more on the people-to-people relations and social and cultural aspects, because this, I think, is also very important. It's basic of the relation of the country's people.
Mas Peter, would you like to add on this as well?
Yeah, I think the relations with Australia are at a really good place right now. We recently signed a new defense cooperation agreement last year. We finalized the Indonesia-Australia Comprehensive Economic Partnership Agreement in 2020. People-to-people exchange, educational exchange is at a good rate right now through, educational programs, scholarship programs like the Colombo Plan, LPDP, and so on and so forth. So I think there's a lot on the table that can be discussed and can be improved on. I think from the Indonesian end, as we've seen from previous engagement with foreign counterparts, Prabowo will likely also talk about flagship programs of the government, like the free meal program or Danantara. But I do think that focusing on shared interests and interests regionally are, I think, should be more prioritized compared to more, domestic flagship programs. So I think the bilateral agenda as far as regional security, bilateral defense cooperation, trade, as well as investment should be higher on the agenda for discussions.
Okay, before we
I
continue
like
with
it.
our discussion, we can see in our screen now that the car of Anthony Albanese, that's carrying Anthony Albanese, has entered the presidential palace in Jakarta.
Oh.
It's followed by a group of horses.
Yes,
Yeah.
horses, and also a lot of school children also actually lining up to welcome the Prime Minister of Australia. And we can see also the flag of Australia and Indonesia is standing next to each other.
Yeah. And we also know that the relationship between Indonesia and Australia is already flourishing at the period of President Joko Widodo's time. And with Prabowo Subianto's military background, can Prabowo build even a stronger relations with Australia? Maybe I would go to Mas Peter. How do you see this?
I think it's less about Prabowo's military background. I think it's more with his personal affinity for international affairs. I think that's what will likely be more of a factor towards Indonesia's foreign policy. But I do think as far as Indonesia-Australia relations goes, there is probably a ceiling as far as how close we can go specifically on military cooperation. On economics and trade and investment, people-to-people exchange, I think there's a much greater limit to be reached. But as far as military cooperation, Australia provides a specific set of defense and security goods for Indonesia, which Indonesia needs.
Okay. Apologies,
Oh, yeah.
Mas
Let's
Peter,
go back
sorry,
there.
we could go to the State Palace
The
right
ceremony.
now to see the ceremony of the visit of Australian Prime Minister Anthony Albanese.
Tegak senjata! Perang! Lapor, upacara penyambutan siap dimulai. Selanjutnya pasukan siap diperiksa. Upacara penyambutan telah dilaksanakan. Laporan selesai. Kembali ke tempat.
How impressive we see the ceremony between the ceremony held for welcoming the Prime Minister of Australia, Anthony Albanese, and now we see all the delegations,
Indonesian delegation.
Indonesian delegations
Presiden Prabowo
welcoming
Subianto,
the Prime Minister.
yeah, introducing Indonesia's delegation to
Yes.
Anthony Albanese, Australian Prime Minister.
Siswa Pramono.
Yes, previously we see Mutia Hafid, also Erick Thohir, and also Teddy. And
Indonesian ambassador.
and yes, the Indonesian ambassadors as well, for Australia. And this is such a very grand welcome actually for the Prime Minister to come to Indonesia, and we can see how close Indonesia and Australia seeing from this ceremony held for the visit of the Prime Minister. So Ibu Effie and Mas Peter, we would also like to know your view on this ceremony. If this ceremony, is there any difference on this ceremony held for the Prime Minister of Australia compared to other country leaders that ever visited Indonesia? So how do you see this ceremony today, as we just seen on the screen? Ibu Effie, would you like to start first?
I'm sorry, I've never seen the other ceremonies before because I focus more on the substantial relations
Right,
rather than
right.
this kind of ceremony. But from what I have seen so far on the screen, it seems that we give the highest state
Respect.
ceremony to the Prime Minister Albanese. So it showed that Indonesia also perceive Australia as a very important partner, and we respect our
Yes.
guests and our neighbors, which I think a good gesture from Indonesian side.
Yes, Mas Peter.
Well, I was here for the special report for Erdogan visit, and it's
Okay.
the exact same sort of rundown, I think. So I think the visit for the Japanese delegation was also very, very
Also like
similar.
this, yeah.
So I think it's Prabowo's preference for
Okay.
grand ceremonies such as these, for head of state visits. So I think from how grand it is, we can expect some big discussions on the bilateral agenda, hopefully, as well.
And now we can see that the two leaders have entered the palace and continuing with signing the books and photo sessions before conducting lots of discussion, I guess. And we hope that there will be, like Mas Peter said, grand, vast discussions between two countries. And maybe continuing about what we've discussed earlier, Mas Peter, that in a defense perspective, Prabowo's background, will it be one step ahead, or how it will be President Prabowo's approach with Australia in the defense perspective?
I think it depends. Although we do share the same neighborhood, we have shared security challenges, we have shared threats, transnational crime, maritime security, and so on and so forth. Again, Indonesia can be aligned with Australia in some aspects of interest, but we're not allied with them, right?
Yeah.
Indonesia historically is not aligned. We have the free and active foreign policy. Australia is the ally of the United States. So I think as far as the bilateral defense and security relationship, we can focus on these shared interests. We have the needs of military modernization and capacity building, and also working with regional partners on transnational crime and maritime security. But in great power politics and rivalries with U.S., China, and so on and so forth. Australia may side with the U.S., whereas we may side with Indonesian interests. So I think there's a limit in how far those cooperations can go. But because there are so many threats in this region, I think cooperation is needed nonetheless. So while it's not alliance per se, alignment and meaningful cooperation that can result in shared results for both sides, I think is equally important.
Yeah, but definitely we are a neighbor that is so close in geography locations.
Now, yeah, they are having the bilateral meeting between President of the Republic of Indonesia, Prabowo Subianto, and the Australian Prime Minister, Anthony Albanese. And later, I think, in this bilateral meeting, there are several agendas that will be discussed. And Mas Peter, I'd like to know your view on the relations between Indonesia and Australia, and of course, this Australia, for Australia, deepening relations with Indonesia, it's key for its relations and strategy in the Indo-Pacific strategy. So how do you see with the tensions also of US, China, the tensions are heating up. So how do you see that Australia and Indonesia relationship will go?
Yeah, as I said before, I think Indonesia and Australia are in a good place bilateral relations-wise. We've had lots of challenges, obviously, throughout the years because of differing national interests, differing strategic alignments, and so on and so forth. But I think right now we're at a good place. But as I said before, I think the bilateral relationship will continue to focus on these shared interests and shared needs, on what either side needs. So in defense and security, I would say focusing on shared security challenges for Indonesia, we might need assistance and cooperation with partners as far as the military modernization goes. As far as trade, it's Indonesia wanting to open up its market to the world and export more products from Indonesia to other countries. So I think it really depends on the sector and how far either side is willing to work to strengthen the ties on these sector ties.
Yeah.
We also know that Australia and Indonesia, maybe Bu Vivi, like we said, there are a lot of challenges in our relationship between Indonesia and Australia. We also can say maybe misperceptions or challenges, even though we have also cooperation in various fields. What do you think that President Prabowo should do to make a more trusted Indonesia in the cooperation between the two countries?
Yes, I agree. There has to be